let me confess right out in front of God and everyone that last Sunday morning I played hooky from church. And I hope you'll understand it's because in the 12 years that I have been in Georgia, I have never tailgated before a football game. How can I relate to this congregation if I've never tailgated? And my family out on the left coast who were flying in for the Falcons-Raiders game. Now, guess who they were for? And so they came in, and there were 6 of them, and my brother and nephew and other friends and relatives. And this last summer, I talked to my brother, and I said, now, Dave, I have connections with the front office of the Falcons, and I could probably get us some sweet seats for nothing if you'll just set aside all that Raider gear and just act like a normal person. There was a long pause. He said, nah, I'd rather pay. And so they came out, bought the tickets, and lo and behold, last Sunday afternoon, I was sitting right in the Raider section. I was surrounded by big, angry men dressed in black. I never even saw the face of the man who was sitting in front of me because he was wearing a black full terrorist mask the whole time. I saw people who were dressed like Satan. In fact, I saw a father and son Satan. There was a dad who had papier-mâché satanic. These weren't Raider horns. These were satanic horns with a face painted silver. He's walking along with a 4-year-old boy who was also dressed in satanic apparel. Even my nephew who came was filled with tattoos all over his body. Only my nephew's tattoos are all Bible verses. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, has forgiven spelled vertically down his leg and all the rest. It was quite an amazing event. I wore a red shirt, but I kept very quiet in that crowd. Here's the punchline. I got pickpocketed by a Raider fan. My wallet is in California somewhere. And I remember the exact moment. It's one of those ones where they bump into you and there's somebody behind while you're looking this way. And I spent the fourth quarter walking around with security trying to find the person and then dialing all my credit card companies and all the rest. So anyway, an angry person stole my possession. And that's about as close as I could pull all this together. And there was an elder who was with me as well, who snuck out along with me for this event. When it comes to possessions, easy come, easy go. Give them to God. Now let's talk about anger. Anger may be the deadliest of all the deadly sins. It's been said that we live today in the age of anger, a time when there has been the breakdown of civilized behavior and an upswing of personal nastiness like never before. For example, did you realize that you are less and less likely to die on a highway from a drunk driver and more likely to die from an angry driver? More and more, the quarrels of children on playgrounds are getting settled by violence between their parents. According to an FBI study, every 18 seconds, a woman in the United States is battered, and 4 women die every day from being beaten to death by a boyfriend or a husband. It may just be that the greatest need of our society is anger management. And with that idea in mind, I'd like to invite you to turn to the Word of God. If you'd reach for that Bible and turn to the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verses 25 through 32, and you'll find it on page 1822. I'm going to give you plenty of time so you don't get angry with me. So I don't know about you, but my grandma used to quote one of these verses to me and to my brothers and sisters, my cousins, when we were in our timeout. I didn't call it timeout back then, but she would come in and she would say, now, Victor, Ephesians 4:32, she would say, be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ hath forgiven you. This is a very practical verse. So let's begin here looking at verse 25. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor, for we are all members of one body. And then verse 26, in your anger do not sin. Now, I want to stop you right there, and I want to do a 2-minute sidebar. In your anger do not sin. Anger can be a good thing. We need to get that out of the way. In fact, Paul's verb here is in the imperative. What he's really saying is, be angry, yet without sinning. A number of years ago, there was a dear, sweet Christian woman by the name of Rosa Parks who got into a bus. She was exhausted from the day. She sat down, and she was told that she had to move to the back of the bus because of the color of her skin. And dear, sweet Rosa Parks got angry. And because she was angry as a Christian in a Christian way, the world today is a different place. Anger is the only one of the deadly sins that God has. Jesus got so teed off. Remember, he upended the tables and he sent the pigeons flying through the sanctuary, and he brandished a whip against the money changers. Someone has said, the measure of a person is the size of what makes you angry. For us today, what makes us angry are potholes and our computer freezing up and things like that. But what angered Jesus was the exploitation of the poor, the plight of men and women going into eternity without God. And I got to believe that God today is angered when he sees the way that the followers of Jesus Christ around the globe are being persecuted all around the globe on a scale that has never been in the last 2,000 years. Or closer to home, I believe God is angered by the fact that there are so many children whose minds are being wasted because they're not being properly educated. Sometimes it's a sin not to be angry. And so we're told here, be angry, yet without sinning. The difference is there is an anger that drives us toward justice, and there is an anger that drives us toward resentment and punishment. And it's this other kind of anger we're talking about today. It is trying to calm and tame that snarling beast that's deep within our soul. And here's the key. We continue on in the reading, verse 26. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. We'll come back to that. Keep going. Verse 27, and do not give the devil a foothold. He who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work doing something useful with his own hands, that he may have something to share with those in need. Do not let any unwholesomeness come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you are sealed on the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Let's go back to the phrase, do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. When I first read that years ago, I thought, oh, what a poetic soundbite. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. And then in 1998, I was standing on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem during a time when I was doing a sabbatical study at St. George's College in East Jerusalem. And I was with the group that I was studying with, our professor, Dr. Callum McDougall. And he was lecturing to us as we were standing on the Temple Mount, and he was pointing across the valley to the flat-roofed Arab homes on the opposing hillside, as they were all in these terraces. And he said in Bible times, the homes were a lot like today's poor Palestinian homes. And then he pointed out to us the fact that we were actually standing on the very spot of David's palace. And he said, look how easy it would have been for David to simply look down and see Bathsheba as she was bathing on a roof. In other words, he was saying privacy was non-existent in those early homes. And then he went on to say, that is why Paul was so concerned about anger between Christians, and why he said, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Because at the end of the day, the people would come into these tiny little apartments with paper-thin walls, and they were families literally living on top of one another. And if the Christians were tearing at each other, if they were yelling at each other, if they were engaged in yelling, it would go right through the walls. It would go out into the neighborhood, and it would adversely affect the witness of the Christians. Reminds me of the old I Love Lucy show, remember, with Fred and Ethel living upstairs when they were going at it. You could hear the china breaking and the furniture breaking and all that sort of thing. And Ricky and Lucy lying in their beds wouldn't be able to sleep because the plaster was coming down. And basically what Paul's saying is, don't Fred and Ethel your neighbors. Resolve your anger while you're out there during the day, so that when you come inside, the sun will not go down on your anger. Tonight, I happen to have checked. The sun goes down at 6:56. We have some work to do before the sun goes down tonight. First, perhaps you grew up in a Christian family where anger was the one unacceptable emotion. Swallow your rage like a good little Christian. The only problem with that is if you try to live that way, it's a lot like the experience. Have you ever tried to hold a beach ball underwater? You may have done that. You sit on the beach ball, you hold it down as hard as you can, you hold it down over here, but inevitably, you know what's going to happen. That ball is going to go whoop, or it's going to go whoop, and it'll probably happen at some unexpected time. And was with anger, it'll happen unexpectedly and very often inappropriately. Or even worse than random bursts of anger is if we don't deal with anger constructively, then we end up being something worse than angry. We become bitter. And that happens when the anger sinks down into the depths of our soul like leaky barrels of hazardous waste, and it begins to poison our relationships and eat away at us even physically. In fact, this is a word from the CDC. Cardiovascular epidemiologist Janice E. Williams says, what we're finding is that the risk of heart attacks associated with anger is comparable with that of smoking and high cholesterol. And so for the sake of our spiritual, our physical, our relational, and our emotional well-being, don't let the sun go down on your anger. How do we do that? First, we have to admit something, and that is, doesn't anger feel good? There is no euphoria like a good blast of anger. Come on, admit it. You loved yelling at those replacement refs this fall, didn't you? Man, it felt so good. I scream at the television like that. Author Mary Gordon said that anger is like the salt around the rim of the margarita glass. One taste and you've got to have more. That's why Paul says here in verse 27, do not give the devil a foothold. From his foothold inside us, the devil then is able to steer us and even sometimes even take us over. Have you ever lost your temper and afterwards somebody says to you, wow, I've never seen that side of you. You almost seem like somebody else. Or even more heartbreakingly, Daddy, I was so afraid. I didn't know who you were. And then second, don't let the sun go down on your anger means get that anger out in the sunlight. While it's still day, pull it out, look at it, analyze it, and say, what is going on here? Now, let me tell you why that's so important. And that is, unlike any of the other deadly sins, anger is a secondary emotion triggered by something deeper and hidden. And an example of that I can give from my own life analogously is every couple of years I have an episode of back spasms. I don't know, any other members of the Oh My Aching Back Club out there? You have to have back spasms to know what that's like. It's shoot me, put me out of my misery. It's just awful. And yet I don't worry when I have that. It's like molten lava in your hip or your sciatic nerves on fire. And I don't even really worry when I'm driving to see the doctors, wonderful doctors. I'm driving to see them. The worst thing in the whole world is I hit a red light. You have to sit there for no red light is ever as long as when you're having back spasms. And then finally get there because my doctor has this amazing thing that I have a little permanent little dot hole in my lower back where he has given me these shots over the years, and he doesn't even have to, he just looks for that little spot and he gives me a shot. I walked in, bent over, and he gives me that shot. And a few minutes later, I walk out standing up, and 4 days later, I'm lifting weights again. I said one day to him, why don't you tell me explain that magic? And he said, it's this. He said, Beck, what you have is a trigger muscle, a little muscle deep in your back. And what happens is it gets inflamed and it gets irritated. And he went like this with his finger. He says it goes berserk. And then it fires up the muscles around it and they begin to spasm. And then the muscles around that begin to spasm and on. And then it starts throbbing and it does all this aching and all this other thing. And what I do is I have this shot. He said this, if I can get that trigger muscle to lay down, then the other muscles around it relax. And the ones around those relax. And pretty soon you're up and you're on the mend. I tell you, anger is like all those other muscles that are contracting and throbbing and aching. And all of that is triggered by something deeper and something that is hidden. Let me mention 4 triggers of anger. One of them, parents, you'll all know this one. One of them is fear. If you ask my daughters, when have you felt the holy wrath of your parents coming down upon you in your life? They will say, when we came home late from curfew. But you know why? It's because we parents have a video inside of our heads, and that video is called The City After Midnight. And when our kids are late coming home, we see this video that features our child as the victim of every form of mayhem and violence that we can even think of. So the poor kid walks in, and we just hit him with this rage, when in reality, what we're feeling is what? Fear. So fear triggers anger. Another one is low self-esteem, feelings of inferiority. Deeply ingrained in many of us is the fact that there's just stuff in our backgrounds that make us predisposed to feeling like people take us for granted, and and they undervalue us. And my anger is a way of saying, now listen, you've got to take me seriously. And I think very often we have people we talk about and we say about the person, boy, she has an attitude, or he has an attitude. And a lot of times when you scratch just a little bit beneath that attitude, what you find are issues of self-esteem. It's anger growing out of a feeling of inferiority. And then third, sometimes that anger comes out of sheer frustration. God puts people in our lives that you have to thank God for, because when you're with them, you just find yourself calling on the name of the Lord. Ugh. It's like they were put on earth to drive you up the wall. It's kind of like the story of the man who was a farmer, and he wanted to get a divorce from his wife, so he went to see the attorney, and the attorney said, may I help you? And the farmer said, yeah, I want to get one of them their divorces. And the attorney said, do you have any grounds? Farmer said, yeah, I got about 140 acres. And the attorney says, I'm sorry, sir, you don't understand. What I mean is, do you have a case? And the farmer said, no, I don't have a case. I've got a John Deere. And then the attorney said, listen, sir, let me put it this way. Do you have a grudge? He said, sure, I got a grudge. That's what I put my John Deere in every night. And then the attorney said, no, what I mean is, do you have a suit? And the farmer said, sure, I got a suit. I wear it every Sunday. And the attorney finally said, sir, no, what I mean is, does she beat you up or anything? He said, no, we're both up about 4:30 every morning. And finally, the attorney had just had it. He said, sir, what I mean is, why do you want a divorce? And the farmer said, it seems we never have a meaningful conversation. If your anger is toward your spouse, I want to give you an acronym for dealing with anger with your spouse. The acronym is FIGHT, F-I-G-H-T. Face each other, ignore distractions, guard your tongue, halt the history, and touch one another lovingly. Let me say it again. FIGHT, face each other, ignore distractions, guard your tongue, halt the history, and touch one another lovingly. Avoid anger out of our frustration. And then the number one reason why we have anger, honestly, if we look in our hearts, and that is, it's out of hurt. Anger grows out of hurt. Believe it or not, MTV a few years ago had a special series on the 7 deadly sins, and the segment on anger showed a young woman who was an angry poet. And night after night, this woman would just spew raging, angry, even pornographic, hostile lyrics at audiences in nightclubs. And she didn't even make a secret of the fact that she had been abused sexually by her stepfather when she was a child. And it was very clear that the reason for this woman's anger grew from the hurt and the betrayal that she had experienced. Somebody hurt you once, didn't they? And it hurts even to think about it. And today, one of two things is true, and that is, either you have released those feelings of rage and resentment, or they're still there. And they're still gnawing away at you. And if they're still seething, they're still winning. And you're losing. And so the question, is there a way that we can release our hurt? A way that we can let go of our anger before 6:56 this afternoon? There's only one way, and the Apostle Paul tells us in verse 30, he says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger. In other words, this irrational emotion of anger has got to be overcome by an even more irrational act of forgiveness. You say, but he took away 15 years of my life. I don't know how you're ever going to forgive something like that. But the fact that you are not forgiving is allowing that person to continue to diminish the quality of your life even now. Somehow we've got to deposit that anger at the cross. We need Jesus. We need his cross. Back in 1984, I had the privilege of attending the Los Angeles Olympics in Los Angeles. And when I was there, it was post-Vietnam, very patriotic time. And all throughout the Olympics, you heard the chant, just roaring crowds chanting USA. It was a time also when I had the greatest luck of the draw in my life. I got the best seats I've ever had for any athletic event in my entire life. And that was I got the front row of the swimming finals. And literally the front row. It was like pool fence Vic. And it doesn't get any better than that. And yet on the main event of that day, which was the butterfly for the women, where our American Mary Maher was going for gold, and now we were all there. It was a big moment. All of a sudden, a man came running down to the stands, came in next to me, shoved me out of the way, and started screaming in French. I was not pleased. As a matter of fact, I was quite upset. Hear me right on this, but if you've ever been around French people in crowds, it's clear they have a different understanding of personal space than we do. And this guy had literally pushed me out of the way. And he was standing. Of course, I was sitting. I had to stand. I still couldn't see the end of the pool. I was just that far from showing the gentleman that we Americans have elbows too, when my sister-in-law, who was sitting right behind me, leaned forward, grabbed me by the shirt. She speaks fluent French. And she said, "Vic, out there in lane 3, that's his daughter." His daughter. And I experienced from that point on a transformation from rage into one of the golden moments of my life. Because his 12,000 people were screaming for our American swimmer. Here was the lonely voice of a dad shouting in French for his daughter, the only voice anyone could hear. And all of us around me at that point just were quiet and watched the unfolding drama as we watched this man screaming. And we saw him begin to cry when his daughter touched second, got the silver medal. And then she crawled out of the pool. She looked around in the crowd trying to find her dad. Of course, he was so close she could hear his voice because he had shoved me out of the way. And she looked up and she flashed a smile that would have shattered a glass. And I was the first man in the world who was able to congratulate him on his daughter winning the silver medal. He pointed at the ground and he said, "Thank you." And I looked at him and I said, "Hey, no problem." And I realized this was just like me, another dad with his daughter wrapping him around her little finger. And as he ran back up the stairs, I thought how close I came to anger robbing me of what I look back on as one of the great moments of my life. Don't let that sun out there go down on your anger. You have until 6:56.